All right, and we almost there. Okay, so we are live streaming. Okay, without further ado, thanks for everyone for bearing with us here this morning. Good morning. Welcome back to another NJSBA webinar. My name is Michael Quedal, Quality Controls for the New Jersey School Boards Association, and thank you so much for joining us this morning and carving out an hour of your time as we talk about today's topic, NJSBA's Superintendent Evaluation Tool, a path to effective board superintendent collaboration. Join us this morning as we share valuable insights into utilizing the NJSBA's Superintendent Evaluation Tool. This session will demonstrate how the tool not only fulfills the board's statutory responsibility of evaluating the superintendent, but also provides feedback that enhances the board-superintendent relationship and drives continuous improvement. Don't miss out on this opportunity to strengthen your district's leadership dynamic. This webinar, for those who are here and are attending live, we'll offer one board member academy credit. Just give us a couple days, a couple of business days for that to be reflected on your transcript due to it being a manual process on our end. A couple of things regarding the Zoom features really quickly before we get going here. Towards the right side of your buttons, you will see the CC button. That is your closed captioning functionality. If you click that, it will allow you to view the closed captioning of this session. You will also be able to view and save the entire transcript of the session if you need it. The Q&A is turned on. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. We have a ton of content to get through, so maybe the content will answer the questions throughout the presentation. But if you do have any questions, we do encourage you to utilize the Q&A function. It just gives us a better way to organize the questions coming in. The Q&A is turned on, and we definitely want to hear from you there as well. So if you want to say hi, tell us where you're from, drop a comment in the comment chat function. Attendees of this webinar should be aware that the views expressed by non-NJSBA employees and outside speakers or panels are intended purely for informational purposes and do not necessarily represent the views, opinions, or mission of the New Jersey School Boards Association. NJSBA remains committed to providing nonpartisan and apolitical information, resources, and advocacy to advance public education and promote the achievement of all students through effective governance. Finally, today's session is being recorded. We are also simulcasting on our YouTube channel. So all of those who are joining on our YouTube side, thank you for joining us here this morning. And the slide deck and the recording will be uploaded on the SWUGO page as a resource. So we encourage you to share the recording post-webinar with other members of your district and definitely leverage the content and resources on that side as well. So without further ado, it is now my pleasure to introduce Charlene Peterson, Senior Field Service Representative from the New Jersey School Boards Association. Good morning, Charlene.
Good morning, Michael. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this morning with everyone. And it is our pleasure to share with you the Superintendent Evaluation Tool and Process. When Michael read our mission statement and talked about, promoting student achievement through effective governance, that the Superintendent Evaluation Process and Tool is one of the, ways that the board exercises that. So thought, the timing is perfect, that we're just, most boards are, if you've not gotten started, will be shortly on the superintendent evaluation process. So, we want to really focus this morning on the fact that this is a collaborative process with the board and the superintendent. So I have joining me this morning, the superintendent, Dr. Mitzi Murillo. So I'm just going to have her introduce herself.
Good morning, Charlene, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. As Charlene said, I am superintendent in the Mendon Borough School District. I'm starting my 13th year next month. And for 12 of those years, I've had the pleasure to have Charlene as my field service rep. So it is a pleasure to be here with everyone. Thank you. So we're going to start off on the purpose of the annual evaluation. As Michael had stated, the CSA evaluation is required by statute, and you can see the code outlined there. The annual CSA evaluation is essential for maintaining effective leadership. The process, when completed successfully, will foster open communication between the CSA and the Board of Education. And I know that Charlene spoke about a collaboration, and that is the message that we want to share today. It will promote trust and collaboration by ensuring expectations are clearly articulated and progress is shared. So again, the CSA evaluation happens in a moment in time, but it is happening throughout the year as well.
And I think, and the other thing that's important is the bottom line of, it's to benefit our students, right?
Absolutely.
So as we, as was just mentioned, that this is a process and more than just a moment in time. So there's several elements. As much as we've talked about our evaluation tool, there's also preparation or work that the board has to do to get ready for this process, and the superintendent as well. So as we're working together as that team, just some of the things that are important is for the board, and we're going to go through all of these things this morning with you, to have an evaluation calendar, have training, talk about the goal setting, the importance of evidence, the tool itself, how the work that the board does to get the final evaluation prepared, and then importantly, that summary sit-down conversation between the board and the superintendent. So as it was mentioned, that this is mentioned in statute and code. So in statute, it says that, we know that this is part of what we're required to do and that we need to evaluate the superintendent at least once a year. It should be in writing. The board and superintendent should meet to discuss the findings. We say that the evaluation will be based on the goals and objectives in the district. So that's why we'll be talking about the goals piece of it shortly. Responsibilities of the superintendent as identified in the job description, and then other such criteria prescribed by the State Board of Ed. And we will also talk about that in a little bit as well. From the regulation part of it, that's where it sets the deadline of July 1st that this process needs to be completed by, and importantly, by a majority of the board's total membership. And then some of the components are to include areas of strength, areas needing improvement, recommendations for professional growth. And then again, it all comes back to our students. And then the last piece of it is that summary sit-down conference. And again, just want to point to your attention that it is in code that summary conference meeting should include a majority of the total membership of the board. So in terms of guidance of who can participate or if anyone's precluded from participating, the School Ethics Commission has identified that if a board member has a relative employed in the district, then you would be prohibited from participating in any and all issues related to the superintendent, including evaluation of the performance. And essentially the guidance that comes from the School Ethics Commission is they don't want there to be the perception that any benefit would come to your relative as a result of you being on the board. So that's why that requirement is in there. And when we say that you are prohibited from participating, that means that essentially you have no more rights than any other member of the public. So you would not allow to be, even if you were not writing the evaluation, you would not allow to be in any executive session or any non-public discussions of the evaluation and the evaluation process. So we sometimes, as much as we showed you that July 1st deadline, I've been asked in the past, well, who holds us accountable to that? Is there a board police? And so the answer is essentially that CUSAC and, the state's monitoring system in 2018 updated some of its requirements. And so now there are 6 points associated with the board being able to complete the superintendent evaluation by July 1st. And then one of the other requirements is that a board has to have a policy about the evaluation process and that new board members need to be trained on the process. And so we have added that training, or that training is part of Governance 1. So now that new board members have to complete Governance 1 within the first 90 days of board service, the intent then is that you will have the training on the process before you would actually start evaluating the superintendent. Okay.
So we've mentioned the deadline of July 1st, but in essence, that means that it should be completed in June at some point. One is something that you should consider as board members and CSAs is to aligning the summary conference to your June meeting, Board of Education meeting so that you don't have to schedule a special meeting to complete the evaluation in that timeline. We will be providing a timeline later on that kind of shows how you get to the July 1st and that you meet all of the requirements of the pre-conference and things like that within that time frame. It is also important to show that the school board support. CSAs have already received that an email that states that the evaluation tool is open. Once you create the sample evaluation, once you review the sample evaluation calendar, you can start looking at how that will look in your district. In our district, we'll start it in April. I do my submission in April, and then the conference is scheduled for the end of May or the beginning of June. The board president will have an electronic access to the compiled document upon completion by every individual board member, and the members can also track completion of the evaluation tool. So Charlene, as our field serve rep, she communicates with our board president. She reminds them how many individuals have not completed it yet. So the board president can reach out to the other members and encourage them to complete it. Being considerate of the time of the board members, we do give them a few weeks for them to review, and we include weekends in that timeline.
So, and I just wanted to add too, if your district finds the situation where the board president is conflicted because they have a relative that works in the district, then the board would identify either the vice president or someone else as the person then that would be kind of the lead person and the point of contact for this process. And even in our New Jersey School Board census, there is the opportunity to have someone else identified as the alternate lead if the board president is conflicted.
So in this slide, what you see a visual representation of the process. Starts with the district goal setting and action plans. This usually happens in our district during the board retreat that we hold either at the end of the previous year or at the beginning of the current year. There's district goal progress updates that should be happening throughout the year through superintendent reports at board meetings or any other avenue that the superintendent shares information with the board and the community. There is a cloud or something there regarding the superintendent evaluation pre-conference. I believe this is optional, and Charlene can speak a little bit about that. You have the submission from the superintendent, because the superintendent starts the evaluation process by submitting their district goals and the self-assessment and evidence regarding the leadership standards. You have the board members complete their individual superintendent evaluation. The non-conflicted board members meet to review the compilation of the evaluation results. Then you schedule the annual summary conference, and then the board president and superintendent sign and date the annual performance report prior to July 1st. But Charlene, if you want to speak a little bit about, I think speaking about that later, the superintendent pre-conference, correct?
Yep. No, we will address that in a little more detail in just a couple of minutes here. Again, just kind of wanted to make the point that, and I think that it was just showed you that this is a process and it's a year-long process. Like it was mentioned that the goals start in the summer. So as much as we think, okay, maybe now it's time to start the superintendent's evaluation, recognize that this process began on July 1st.
So the goals is part of the evaluation. It's legally required that it be based that the evaluation be based on goals and objectives. And the conference shall include progress of the CSA in achieving and implementing the school district goals. In our district, our goals are based on our strategic plan. So every year during the board retreat, the goals from the strategic plan are refined to develop annual district goals. And Charlene facilitates that as well with our Board of Education. The support, the evaluation tool, and the work that the field rep can do with the CSA to set the district goals, again, is something that our district has benefited from, and we've used every year that I've been here. It's important to note that the progress monitoring on these goals should be occurring throughout the school year. It's not, again, I have to emphasize, it shouldn't be the CSA evaluation, the goals shouldn't be the first time that the board sees the goals or that the superintendent is reporting on them. I take every opportunity as a superintendent to relate anything that's happening in our district to the district goals. So I do also want to mention, you have board members that begin in January. So they may not have been in the process of developing those goals when they take on their role as a board member. So it is important that during an orientation, you do share the district goals with the new board members as well, and share information with them. Later on, we'll talk about the evidence that we can provide to board members, that they have what has happened, what's transpired prior to them taking on the seat as a board member.
So I think, and just to kind of follow up, so it's important that the board and the superintendent have a conversation every year about the district goals. And I think we've demonstrated here that it should be a collaborative process, because this is, kind of the opportunity for the board and the superintendent to work together to kind of identify the what, like what are, say, these 3 or 4 things that we think are so important to move the district forward for the year, that we are going to hold the superintendent accountable by putting it in their evaluation. So as, from the perspective of a board member, you think, that this is one of the ways that you really help make a difference, by identifying that what and then working together with the superintendent. So we had mentioned earlier talking about that evaluation pre-conference. And so this is, a few years ago, we kind of re-looked at or revised our process. And one of the things that we talked about is that a lot of the work that happens in school districts and evaluations, there is like a pre-conference. And we thought perhaps it would be helpful that that also be considered as part of this process as well, especially if we think about the fact that that board members have different knowledge and experience about the work that's taken place in the year, depending on what committees you're on, depending on how long you've been on the board. Those things could all, help make a difference in kind of what your understanding is of the work that's taken place. So we really want to make sure that every board member has the information that they need to write an informed evaluation of the superintendent. So we consider the evaluation pre-conference then to be that first step. And then before anyone starts writing the evaluation, and just be able to sit down with the superintendent and have a conversation. It's typically in executive session. So every time the board would meet in executive session and with the superintendent to talk about her performance, it would have, she would need to receive a rights notice. So just adding that to it. But, it's the important part is making sure from board members, this is your chance to get your questions asked, anything that you're not clear about. And just to have that conversation so that you feel confident leaving, that when it's time to start writing the evaluation, that you have the information that you need.
So when it comes to the documentation and the evidence, in the first area here, it speaks to why you're basing the evaluation on the data that's being presented and the data and the evidence. I recently heard a colleague share that data analysis is not a witch hunt, but a treasure hunt. And I think this applies here. Whereas you're always striving for excellence through professional growth, this is an opportunity to say, okay, we're doing these wonderful things. What would be the next step? So it doesn't need to be looked at as a negative thing if there's areas or opportunities for growth. The collection of evidence, and it shows here that the primary responsibility of data collection falls on to the superintendent, is also an exercise in organization for many CSAs. I mean, we start the year, we have a lot of things that we have to work on, and it's important to begin collecting that data and organizing it as opposed to waiting till April to share it. So I speak to how I create folders and start putting the documents, presentations, whatever it may be, into those areas to assist me when I have to complete my portion of the evaluation and I have to share the evidence with board members. So beyond sharing updates throughout the year, it's collecting other things that may be happening outside the district that I may not be sharing directly with the board, that the board may not be aware. It is helpful to include the entire administrative team in assisting you in collecting that information so that you're able to share it with all of your board members.
And it's also important too that the board and the superintendent have a conversation about what they would like, what the evidence should look like, so that everyone's in agreement. I was sharing earlier that there was a superintendent who was the first time new to a district, and provided evidence the way that it was used to, and turns out this board, the previous superintendent, did it differently in bullet points. And so when I met with the board, they're like, but where are the bullet points? So we really have to make sure then that you're having that conversation, between the board and the superintendent about what's the most effective way for the evidence to be presented to the board.
Charlene, I do want to add to that. Every board member could also be different. So if you know that some people like bullets and that some people want to have a lot of documents to review, I had a board member who told me he spent hours looking at my evidence, but it also gave him an idea of what the role entails. Because I don't think that, necessarily everybody understands the scope of the role, which we'll speak about a little bit later. And providing that information is also helpful. If you have it there, it's available for those who want to read and look at multiple things they can. And for those that just want a bulleted amount, I do like a one-pager. And that way they can see it that way as well. So it's meeting the needs of the board members as well.
Perfect point. Good. So as much as, we've kind of been talking about the process, we just want to introduce you a little bit to the tool, or kind of the components of New Jersey School Board's tool. And, a question I get asked sometimes is, like, do we have to use New Jersey School Board's tool? And the answer is no. Like, what you have to do is be in compliance with statute and code, just that our tool provides you a way to do that. So it has kind of three components to it. First part is starts out with kind of that online, each person logging in individually, so that we're capturing individual input, both of the superintendent and the board members, as a way to ensure that everyone's voice is heard. And then once all individuals who are able to, who are not conflicted, who are able to complete the evaluation, then once you're completed, then New Jersey School Boards compiles it into one anonymous document. And, that compilation kind of starts automatically. As soon as the first board member is done, kind of our system starts that compiled document. Then when the second member is done, it adds that one, so that when the last board member is done, the compiled document is finished. So like I said, it's an anonymous document that reflects everyone's opinions. And then So now then we know that most of the work then that the board does is based on the majority opinion. So now we've had the individual opinion, we now have all opinions. So now then the work of the board then is to take that compiled document that reflects all of the opinions, and now kind of extract from it through conversation and through that report what the majority opinion is. And then that majority opinion is what is the superintendent's actual evaluation. The state calls it the annual performance report. So that then is the document that the board and the superintendent would use to have that conference, and like I said, serves as the superintendent's actual evaluation. Okay. Do you want to go ahead? Yep. You're muted. Yep.
There we go. The CSA the school board's evaluation tool is comprised of two sections. It's the district goals and the 6 leadership standards, which it's important to note they're based on the National Policy Board's professional standards for educational leaders. And this is important because the leadership standards are aligned with best practices for effective leadership. It provides a uniform framework to evaluate leadership. It emphasizes key leadership practices that drive student achievement and organizational success, which is what everybody should be striving for in a school district. And it captures the multifaceted nature of the CSA role.
And earlier when I had talked about the statute, it said, and other such criteria is prescribed by the State Board of Ed, that New Jersey State Board of Education did adopt these national leadership standards. So again, kind of that tie-in. So this is just kind of, showing you kind of how you as a board member and as the superintendent then, how you get access to the tool to get this process started. So it starts out really with our New Jersey School Board census, which is just kind of our roster or listing of all of the members. So all of the members need to be listed in the census. And particularly for those districts where you have a send-receive relationship, and the sending rep is able to evaluate the superintendent in the receiving district, but they need to be in the receiving district's census. We talked about the importance of the board president being identified because our system ties whoever that person is to the one who then is able to access the reports. And I had mentioned that if the president was conflicted, then you can identify an alternate. When you do log into the system, your username is always your email address that New Jersey School Boards has on file for you in the census. And then you would set up your own password. And then it was mentioned that the superintendent has to go first because they're the ones that start the process by inputting those district goals. So as a board member, if you tried to log on before the superintendent completed it, you would not be able to. So while it was mentioned that a link is sent to all of the superintendents so that they can get started, from the board's perspective, you receive a link 2 days after the superintendent finishes their portion of it. And it's an automatic process as part of the system that when the superintendent hits submit, that there's a 48-hour window built in so that the superintendent can go back and say, like, I forgot to say this or want to change that or make any edits that they think would be important for the board. And then our system automatically then sends an email to the board that essentially tells you that the superintendent completed their portion, and now it is time for you to log on to complete your portion.
So the goals portion of the online tool, and this is where the CSA begins the process. We complete a short narrative for each of the district goals, documenting the progress and achievement of the goal, and we also give ourselves a self-rating. You can see here where it says superintendent comments, report, remarks, supporting rating. You can also upload links. If there's a lot of information that you want to share or some backup documentation, you can share it in that area. Something for some considerations that I would suggest when providing a rating for a multi-year goal, please consider that, because it could be that the superintendent has achieved that goal for that year, or it could be that's a satisfactory progress made because it's a multi-year goal. So having a conversation and explaining how you're going to be rating a multi-year goal is important. Rating should not surprise the board. So the self-rating from the CSA shouldn't be a surprise to the board, and the ratings from the board shouldn't be a surprise to the superintendent, because again, this has been a discussion throughout the year. And if there have been updates and there have been questions, hopefully they've been addressed throughout the year.
Perfect. So then when the board member logs in, then they will see the goal that the superintendent put in, the superintendent's self-assessment, and then the evidence or the comments that the superintendent provided. Then you as a board member, you are asked then to provide a rating. What do you think? Do you think then the goal, you'll be able to see the superintendent's self-assessment, but then you're asked to make your assessment. Do you think the goal was achieved? Satisfactory progress made, or little or no progress made? And then you're asked to provide a comment. And one of the things that I see often are board members directing or writing their comment as if they're directing it to the superintendent, but actually the intent here in you providing comments is that this compiled document is a working document for the board. So it's important that the comment that you're providing are an explanation to your fellow board members about why you provided the rating that you did. And once the board sits down to have that conversation about the majority opinion, it really is valuable to see the comments and kind of have that understanding of what each board member was thinking.
And this outlines the 6 leadership standards that I had previously mentioned, that shows the scope of responsibilities of the CSA. As you can see, you have mission, vision, and core values, but it talks about the operations, curriculum, instruction, professional capacity, community, governance. It's all inclusive when including it in this tool and evaluating it. I did want to mention, and it shows here, and Charlene, you could probably add more to it, what the not observed means. because I think there are times I mentioned when board members start in January or they're a member of a specific committee, they may not feel comfortable in evaluating in that area possibly, or they don't have the information. Not observe is not a negative rating, correct, Charlene? It's just
Correct.
them feeling they're not in a position that they feel that they can rate that specific standard.
No, that's exactly correct. That we would like, new members or any members to be able to participate as much as they feel comfortable doing so. Because the more voices we hear, the better. But also don't want you to feel that you have to evaluate something that you don't feel comfortable, that you have the personal experience to be able to evaluate it. So that's exactly the purpose of Not Observe, is to allow you to participate where you can, and then give you an option if you don't have that sufficient personal experience.
So this is an example of what board members will see for each of the leadership standards. So you have the standard at the top. In this case, it's standard 1. Personally, I feel that this is the all-encompassing standard where all the others fit in, or subsets of the standard. But you see that you have the standard, you have the rating scale, resources to consider, evidence links provided by the school leader. In my case, I would provide a link to a folder that I have in my drive that I have shared with the board. And that way they can see if it's a PowerPoint presentation, if it's any documentation, you would access it through the tool, and it would take you to the folder in my drive that I have already shared with the board member. So it makes it very easy for the board member to view all of the evidence. It's important that the assessment by the board member be supported by comments for 2 reasons. And I know that Charlene mentioned that for the goals, but it's also very important here as a CSA. It's first to eliminate bias, as previously stated, because you're basing it on the evidence. And most importantly is to provide actionable feedback to the superintendent. So we obviously look at the rating, but we also want to know why the board member feels that should be the rating. So that is equally as important as the rating, at least for me as a CSA.
Good. So one of the things we did, when we revised this tool was, provided specific definitions for the ratings specific to that standard. Because what we were finding is that while 2 board members may have the same perception of the superintendent's performance on a particular area, to one board member, they thought that to them was exemplary, to another it was proficient. So we wanted to make sure that the board was helping the board to be able to kind of speak a common language, or, have a common reference point. So each standard then has a definition for each rating. And then, while there is an overall standard, you'll see then that there are individual indicators under each standard. And it is asked that the board members provide a rating for each one of the indicators. And it was more to ensure that this is a thoughtful process. When we were developing this tool, like, the thought was, well, do you just go down to the bottom and just kind of check that, the overall rating? We said, no, you know what, we're going to have, again, making sure that everyone has looked at it, thought about it. So by looking at the indicators and, marking a rating for the indicators is just kind of the opportunity then to make sure then that as a board, you've given this thoughtful consideration. So recognizing that the system is not going to automatically fill in the rating for the standard, that you as a member then are still going to be asked to do that. Because if recognizing that some of these indicators may have different weights, right? For one board, one of these just may be so important, and in another board, it may not, based on the situation that they're in. So that's why it's important then that you have the ability to rate the standard based on, what's going on in your district. Again, also then, but the importance, it was mentioned, of the comments. So, okay, so now we said, okay, that we wanted each one of the board members, whoever can participate, to make sure that they have done it. So when the board is done, and the way that we know that is your field rep has kind of a tracking that we can see who is, the progress that the board is making, but also the board has the ability to log back in and see the tracking as well. So once then there is a consensus, either the board president or the alternate lead would, reach out or communicate with the field rep that our board is done. Then the field rep goes into New Jersey School Board system and sets a flag that says, yes, this board is done with the superintendent's evaluation. And then we send an email to the president or the lead with kind of instructions of how to go in and download and access these reports. So then they would just, then be able to, once that flag is set, then just be able to log in and have access. We kind of separate the reports by the goal section, the standards section. And I talked about that last piece would be that majority opinion kind of annual performance report. So we provide the board a template for that.
So this is a compilation report, and when I look at this, obviously looking at it as a CSA, I would want to know more about, in this case, when you look at the ratings, about the little or no progress made rating. There's 6 board members, and there's 6 board members that say achieved, 1 that says satisfactory progress made, and 1 that says little or no progress made. And that would make me want to ask, was there lack of information received by the individual? Was there a different metric used by this individual to reach this conclusion? But I think it's important, and Charlene will speak to the minority opinion, the rights of the minority opinion, because it could be that as a whole, the board or the majority opinion says that this goal has been achieved, but I would want to know why that board member didn't think so and what I can do to make sure that I assist them with information or follow up with any questions or concerns they may have. And I think that's really important, to have every individual be able to share their thoughts. And I think, Charlene, you're going to speak to the rights of the minority opinion.
Yes. Yep. And so, like we said, if the final document reflects the majority opinion, one of the rights that the minority opinion always has is the right to be heard. So when we talk about the annual, that kind of summary sit-down conference, that then would be the opportunity. So if I was the person who thought little or no progress was made or satisfactory progress was made, that then would be my opportunity to share with the superintendent why I felt that way. If that wasn't included in the majority document. So you can see how this compilation would help the board be able to identify what the majority opinion looks like. And if you see under the member comments that there are not names or anything associated with it. So when we say that this is anonymous, it is. And so the asterisk just identifies that there is a different board member speaking. And so again, this is a tool for the board to be able to then extract from this what the majority opinion is. So we, just showed you what a compiled, what the compiled goal would look like. And here's an example of standard 2, kind of what that compilation would look like. So again, you can see the overall rating of the standard on the bottom by the board members. Can also look at some of the indicators and the thoughts of some of the indicators. You can see one of the members used the not observed option. And you can see, like, if we look at indicator number 4, that there are 4 board members who thought that this was an area of growth. So this would be important information for the board to consider when it is determining its feedback that it would like to share with the board about the superintendent's performance on this standard. So if you have anything you want to add to that, or.
I just think and you did hit the point that how does this information then translate to the annual performance report? But just like you said, an area of growth, you could also see the opposite of that when it comes to exemplary and the strengths of the superintendent, because you will be reporting out on both, like we do for our teachers. You identify areas of strength and then areas of opportunities for growth. So you could see both in this example.
Well, and again, if we look at those overall ratings, again, you can see that the board, has different thoughts, right? That there's 2 members that thought the overall overall performance on the standard was an area for growth, 1 exemplary, and 5 proficient. So while you see a majority, you can also see how there's room for conversation from the board about, about these differing opinions.
Mhm.
So then this is just kind of the process then that we go through of how do we get to that annual performance report, or that's that summary document that reflects the majority opinion. So like we said, we start with that compiled document that reflects everyone's opinions. It's downloaded by the board president or their designee. And then it's important that the board then comes together in executive session to identify that majority opinion. And as it was mentioned earlier, then the superintendent would receive a rights notice if the board, if that was the case. And so there's a couple different, things that can happen at this executive session to identify the majority opinion. In some boards, I have seen where the board president will already start a draft. So like they'll bring their draft, they'll bring copies of the compiled report so that the board, so that you're not starting with a blank slate. And sometimes some boards find that to be more efficient, and then you're tweaking the draft. And in other cases, I've seen the reverse, where the board just starts with a compiled document, has a kind of blank slate, and then gives feedback to the board president or the designee about what they believe the majority opinion to be that should be included in the document. So either way is fine. What is important is that every board member who is able has had the opportunity to have this conversation, to be part of identifying the majority opinion, so that when the superintendent receives the document truly reflects the majority opinion that has been determined by the board as a whole. And then, like I said, then we provide a template that allows you then to extract and kind of to indicate what that majority opinion is, recognizing then that is the superintendent's final evaluation document.
Charlene, if I could just share, in our district, the board does meet to review the compilation report, and they also meet to review the final draft or the final report. So at each time in executive session, if they are speaking about the superintendent and the evaluation, the superintendent needs to be right at each of those meetings.
Perfect, good. So then this just is a sample of what that template looks like that the board can use then to reflect that majority opinion, to be the superintendent's actual evaluation. And this is, we talked about the fact that the NJQSAC, awards 7 points to the board, or I think it was 6 points to the board, having completed this process by July 1. So this is kind of what that evidence will be. You can see that there's the opportunity for the superintendent and the board president to sign it and date it. So that is essentially, and I just got a request yesterday for someone to say, do you still have last year's? Because we're looking for some help. So just recognizing that is the evidence that QSAC looks for. This template was put together to make sure then that the focus of the evaluation stays on the goals and stays on the standards, to make sure that the board is focusing its feedback to the superintendent on what those agreed upon indicators were going to be. So then for each one of the goals, the board would provide kind of an overall consensus of what the majority opinion rating would be for each one of the goals. And then again, the importance of those supporting remarks. It would be up to the board to decide how to do that. So you'd look at the comments that all of the board members made for each one of those goals. The board, like we said in that previous executive session, would have a discussion about it, and then kind of decide which of those comments or what comments they want to share with the superintendent that will help support the rating that the board is providing to the superintendent. And then the board would do the same thing for each one of the 6 standards, identifying kind of what the overall or what the majority opinion rating is for that standard, and then remarks that they think would be helpful for the superintendent. Then when we talked about the statute and the code, we said, okay, that the evaluation had to identify kind of areas of strength and areas for growth. So the standards really are a way to help us identify those. And again, like I said, keep it focused on the things we agreed upon. So here you're asked to identify which one of these 6 standards are the superintendent's greatest strengths, and you can indicate more than one and provide supporting remarks. And then the same thing of areas for growth and improvement, focused on the standards, again, providing remarks. And then there's an open-ended box at the end for the board to provide some overall summative comments that they would like to share with the superintendent. And again, like I said, this is a collaborative, experience of the board and the superintendent working together.
So the annual summary conference, one of the things that I need to emphasize is the importance of sharing the annual performance report with the CSA prior to the conference. Typically here it is the board president that will share prior to the meeting in executive session with the board. And the reason why I think it demonstrates a commitment to a collaborative and respectful evaluation process and transparency. It helps build trust between the CSA and the board, which is obviously essential for effective leadership and management of the school district. But it's really important. The CSA then has an opportunity to prepare for the discussion, making it more meaningful and productive conversation. If the superintendent knows that these are the strengths and these are the areas of growth, then you can have a productive conversation with the board members. And then even a board member that has a minority opinion, this is where they would have that conversation as well. So I do think that it's extremely important to share the summary report prior to the summary conference.
And I think to that point, when we looked at the statute and code, it said that the summary conference at the least needed to include a majority of the total membership of the board, but it is our recommendation that all non-conflicted members be present for that very reason that was just discussed, is that anyone can be the holder of the minority opinion. Mm-hmm. So like when we looked at that goal, or when we looked at that standard example, where board members had different viewpoints, you don't know who's going to be the minority opinion of any particular situation. So that's why everyone, it's our recommendation that anyone who's not conflicted should be present and part of this conversation, because it really is a way, for the board and the superintendent to kind of come to really reflect on the past year, right? And then kind of recognizing that it'll probably soon be followed by goal setting for the next year. So it's important that everyone has that reflection of the work that was accomplished and the things that were done together in this previous year.
This is a sample evaluation calendar, as we had shared at the beginning of the presentation. The end of the year is really busy. There's end of year events that may be occurring, retirement ceremonies, student recognition, and even the board self-evaluation. So the timing of this is important to plan ahead, simply because you don't want to have a meeting that's going to extend itself and then have an executive session on top of that. You want to give the time required to hold the conference and be able to present this and speak to the other board members about the CSA evaluation tool. So I do think this is an example of how you can start looking at by when. You start with the end date, which is July 1st, and you plan backwards to figure out when you should be starting the evaluation pre-conference, and the superintendent should start the evaluation late April, early May. In some districts, you have multiple board meetings. In our district, we hold one a month, and we don't have summer meetings, so that makes it even more important to figure out what the time frame is going to be.
And the earlier the board can start putting this calendar together, I mean, we suggest even shortly after your reorganization meeting, when you are aware of what your meeting schedule is going to look like for the year, to kind of plan and, like it was just mentioned, plug in those dates. And I was also recently asked, like, for a board that has an April election, or if you're an appointed board, so you may have a calendar that is, as much as the July 1st is the legal deadline, your board, if say you have an April election, may decide that you want to complete the evaluation before the board turns over, right, at the end of April. So you may have to set your calendar, might look different than this one does, just because of, the kind of the agreement that your board has come to as to when it wants to complete the evaluation.
So I mentioned earlier regarding actionable feedback. And so summary of an effective evaluation process includes all of these, all voices. Everybody should feel heard, the board and the CSA. There should be a consensus on the majority opinion. Even those with the minority opinion need to be heard. And the collaboration with the CSA, we are basing this on leadership standards, we're basing this on district goals, but both the CSA and the board have the same goal, which is to improve student achievement, to run the district effectively. We have a community that we all report to. So I think it's important to have the conversation, have actionable feedback that opens doors to dialogue, allows for questions to seek clarification, and that makes the process effective. The feedback should be constructive and should be focused on solutions. And like Charlene said, sometimes what you identify at the end of the year is going to lead to your district goals the following year. So I do think it's important to combine the two and that we're working together.
Perfect. And again, as we talked about in the beginning of this process, kind of ending it the same way of, it all goes back to the students, right? And just kind of the most important part of all of this work is a framework for student success. Go ahead.
So I think these are the considerations, and I think you've heard all of these throughout the presentation. It's not a once a year event. It's ongoing. We're providing information. We're sharing information with the board and our community throughout the year. It's an opportunity to celebrate success from the past year. And I shared with Charlene when we were speaking about this presentation. It is almost cathartic to start the evaluation tool, because it makes me think back and reflect of what has occurred throughout the entire year. So it is exciting to put all the information together and share with the board. For those who are new board members, they get to see what happened prior to that. But I think even the board, the year is usually addressing maybe challenges or issues, and you don't have an opportunity to celebrate your success. And this should be an opportunity to do so. The responsibility of eligible members to fully participate, it is very meaningful when every board member is able to share their information with the CSA and with the other board members. I think it strengthens the board superintendent relationship, but also the board members' relationship with each other. You reflect on performance over a full year. Progress updates and two-way communication is critical. Like I said, the CSA evaluation should not be a surprise for anyone, or the results of the CSA evaluation, and maintaining the evaluation focus on the goals and the standards, and obviously doing what's best for children.
And sometimes from, the board's perspective, sometimes we, have the tendency to focus on kind of what's the latest and greatest thing, right, that just happened. But again, going back to the fact that the evaluation year starts on July 1st. So we really do need to, make sure that we are reflecting that performance over the full year. And also, from the board, making sure that we are staying focused on the goals and the standards, and kind of not evaluating the superintendent on things that were never agreed upon. So, this is, as much as the superintendent is professional in their work, we need to be professional in our work as evaluators of that work, right? And make sure that it's, you said, focused on what the agreed upon goals and standards are. So we, hope that taking you through this process has given you an idea of how this collaborative partnership works and how it helps make a difference for the benefit of your students. I think that was the last slide. Yes, it was. So if there are any questions, I guess we'll turn it over to Michael to let us know if there are or not.
Awesome. Yes, there are a few, and just out of respect of everyone's time here, we'll take a couple. If you have any questions that may come up or we don't address them in this meeting, you're more than welcome to reach out at anyone at NJSBA and we'll forward it over to Charlene or any field service representative. If you know Charlene's email address, email her directly. So is the presentation slide and recording going to be available for board members or administrators who cannot join this webinar? Absolutely. We are recording this webinar and we will be uploading the resources in the SWUGO site along with the recording. So we encourage you to share that with the members of your district. Let me see here. What is the deadline for the superintendent to complete their portion?
So there is no deadline. The only deadline is the July 1st deadline that the process has to be done. So that's the importance of that calendar. So, that's if we talked about the fact that we have to back into it, the first step in the process is that the superintendent, of the tool at least, superintendent completing their portion. And so, it was mentioned that you want to leave the board members a couple weeks for this part of the step, some time for this part of the step. So it almost needs to be a plan based on, and again, it was mentioned that some boards meet twice a month, some only meet once a month. So if you were trying to do this without any additional meetings, it's really would be up to each district to figure out, okay, if our last meeting is this date in June and we need to allow a couple weeks to write the summary, a couple of weeks for the board members to finish their part, the way it ties into our board meetings, then our superintendent needs to be done by this date in order to make all of those things happen.
Couple more. Thanks, Charlene. Are board members able to see each other's comments in the goals?
The compiled document reflects all comments. It again does not identify who said them. It's just kind of that asterisk that tells you that another board member is speaking. And we try and mix up the order of the comments. We learned that after the first couple of years that so-and-so's comment was always first. So then you started to know who that was. So now we scramble them for everyone.
Okay. What recommendations do you have for superintendents who start in a new district in April? There's really no time to complete an eval effectively by July 1st.
So that would definitely be the case. So the board could either be evaluating the outgoing superintendent or the board, they found themselves in a transition and maybe had an interim or an acting. They would just have to document that so that when CUSAC came, and they would have a reason why they don't have an evaluation. Because like you say, if the person's just starting April 1st, usually in most of the new superintendent's contracts, it would say that the board has 60 days to kind of set goals with them. So we're already almost, to the end of the year. So we want to make sure that from the board's perspective, though, that if you find yourself in this unique situation, to make sure that it's clearly documented so that, let's say you're not going to be CUSAC for 3 more years and everyone's scrambling saying what happened to the evaluation in this particular year, that it's clear. You can also just do a quick summary narrative if you want to, that just says, our superintendent just got here a couple months ago. We don't have any goals yet. But some of the things that they've been doing really well that we've seen are this. Some of the areas that we see where growth needs to happen are here. So we still have kind of met those legal requirements, those legal components of it, without having to go through the full process when you find yourself in a situation like that.
Makes sense.
Charlene, if I could just add, for CUSAC purposes, when they come in, they just want the last page of the signature with the date. So they're really not looking at the evaluation except for the signature and the date. So the narrative option, I think it would be a great option for those districts.
Great. One more question. Clarifying about expressing the minority opinion, who speaks on that in the evaluation review with the superintendent?
The holder of the minority opinion. So the whole opportunity is for you to be able to share your opinion if it is the minority opinion. So that's essentially why we want you to be at the table if you're able to be, if you're not conflicted, so that you can share that. And it's important that your voice be heard. And I think it was shared that it's important to the superintendent as well, right, to hear that. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlene. Dr. Murillo, thank you as well for a fabulous presentation. Thank you all for bearing with us in the beginning of the webinar as we sorted things out on our side. Just real quick, I mean, we appreciate everyone's interest in the content here this morning. We're so proud of our webinar series. So we thank everyone for joining us here live today. If you're joining us on recording, thank you as well. We appreciate you. But all of those who are in here live this morning and have stayed for the duration of the presentation. If you came late because of any technical difficulties on our end, it's okay. Because you've stayed for the duration of the presentation, you will be receiving one BMA, one Board Member Academy credit that will be reflected on your transcript in the next couple business days due to it being a manual process on our end. If you have any questions that may come up later today, tomorrow, whenever, you could always reach out to any of us at NJSBA. If we cannot answer the question, we'll forward it along to someone internal who can. We have incredible wealth of knowledge here, so we definitely encourage everyone to reach out to us if you have any questions at all. And I think that's it. Any final comments, Charlene?
No, I just wanted to thank everyone for the time and really also kind of to take the time to get informed about this process, because this is such an important process. And so the more you know about it, the more effective it can be. And again, because of the value of that relationship between the board and the superintendent. I don't know if you want to add anything, or Dr.
No,
Murillo.
I absolutely agree. And I think the timing of it happens once a year. And I think just the review of it with every board member is also beneficial. So I think having this as a webinar where even experienced board members can view it is wonderful.
Fabulous. Thank you all so much. Thanks again for joining us here this morning. We will be back very soon. We have another webinar tomorrow. So if you visit njsba.org under the trainings tab, click webinars. That's where you'll see all of our previous webinars along with the recordings and a lot of great webinars upcoming as well. So again, thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a great rest